Welcome to Cujo Sound. This is Unity and Wwise integrations. Welcome back to Cujo Sound. This is Bjørn Jacobsen speaking, and what we're about to do is that we are going to develop that footstep animation system that we did before. Now, I will strongly encourage you to go back into some of the videos that I posted in the past. There is a playlist called 99 Ways to Footsteps. It clearly kind of explains how Wwise works in terms of footsteps, switch containers, blend containers, and a lot of other things. Not hundreds, but several different ways of dealing with playing the same kind of footstep, but in different ways. You should totally check it out. Now, here in the editor, we are going to add a collider, as you can see here in the game. We're going to make a prefab that we can drag and drop all over the game, and it'll play within this circle here of this, it'll play a specific sound of footsteps instead of the ordinary dirt one that we have when we run around. We're going to make it so that we over here in our inspector window can choose which material should it be changing. If you have a different switch, you can do it like this. The switch that it changes whenever we enter, the switch that it changes whenever we leave, and on which emitter it should be changed. And since our footsteps are generated by our third-person controller object, then we need to point it to this here. We also have an enabled debug so that we can run in and out of the collider and then see if it works. And what this is going to control, it's going to control a switch container. A switch container works differently than the random container that we had before. Now, in Wwise, as you can see here, previously we had an event that would say left foot, right foot, run and sprint, and so on. And it would trigger our footstep, run, and sprint containers, respectively. And that's fine if you want to do it like that. But what we can also do is that we can have it trigger a so-called switch container, which looks slightly different in the icon. And it looks like this in the editor. You select your switch here, and you select which part of the switch you want. The switch is made in your game sync area, just like our RTPCs and states and whatever we want. The switch contains a switch group, and it contains the various switches down here. What you do is that you add containers under it, like you see I've added a random container for dirt and one for grass. And then because I have created a dirt and grass switch over here in the switch group, we can tell it to use the switch group ground material that we will be creating. And this here's the default state. Actually, that's only active once. It's just in case that you don't send something or it goes back to default, then this is the value that it will go back to. It's not that important if you don't deal with default values. So, dirt and grass, the two random containers will appear here. You drag and drop them over here. You can see if we delete these here. This here's our switch container. We have set it to this, and these are now empty. You can even see which one is default. We drag and drop dirt over to dirt and grass over to grass. That means that whenever our event is triggered and it triggers this container, the switch will check which one of these switches over here in this switch group is currently valid. You can only have one switch valid at a given point in time, and a switch is game object specific, meaning that this switch only works for this one game object. It's not global or anything like that. That means that you can have 5 different people walking around this scene, if that's what rocks your socks, and they will be able to have unique footsteps per character, if that's how you work with it. So when we enter this collider, we want it to be grass, as we have written here, which means that it should set the switch to grass. So whenever our event comes in, poof, here, and triggers this folder here, poof, our switch container, it should grass, play the random container grass. And in grass, we will place all our ordinary footstep files. Have in mind that you can have, let's say, dirt and put a random container here for dirt and leave this one out. That means that if you enter this collider, then it will play nothing. But if you add grass here, let's say that your grass container is empty, then Wwise will bring back an error for you, which doesn't work. It will tell you that no specific child is found. That means that it can't find the child the file that is located within this container, because the switch container says play random container, and the random container says I cannot. That gives you an error. That is different from not setting anything in here, because then the switch just says play nothing. It's a bit of a logic thing to understand. It's just in case you get this weird error. We'll get to that. But now, let's get started and build this tool, and let's see how it works. The first thing that we have to do is to establish our system in Wwise so that we know that whenever we trigger the event, it will be triggered by our switch container. So in GameSyncs, under switches, we create a new switch group, and we are going to call it ground_material. Simply because this switch represents our ground material. We are going to have two switches for now, one which is dirt and another one which is grass. For now, we're just going to make it so that grass plays nothing and dirt plays something. And in that way, we can check if this collider works whenever we get that far. Okay, so over here in footsteps, let's create a switch container. And we are going to call it footstep material switch. Now, these switches can be kind of hard to name, especially because the naming convention for this can be kind of easy if it's just one step. But if you have switches in switches in switches, then it becomes very, very difficult. Because imagine if this is the material switch, then inside you have the footwear switch, and inside that you have another switch for like running type. But then you have to name those. So do they then represent what they are, or do they represent what they are switching to? It's very difficult to do that. So find a convention where you somehow label them what they are _ what they do. So this here is a footstep to material switch. The next one could have then been material grass _ to shoe or something like that. Anyway, in here we are going to be creating two random containers, one which is called dirt and one which is called grass. Now, in our switch container, under the group, we select which group to pick from, which means that it picks from over here. And the default one is going to be dirt, because that's the one that is default, because that's the one that is on most of this level. We are going to pick dirt and drag it over here, and grass over here. Good. So we're going to copy our files over here, all these files. We are going to just paste them in here. Now remember that this grass one cannot be empty. So what we're going to do is that we are going to right click and add a sound effect to it. And we are just going to call it silence. See, there's currently nothing. But in here, we can say add source, add silence. And it's just going to be 1 second, which means that this file is basically a sound that can play. Right now we're trying to play it, and it's silent. And that's a really smart way of doing it, because this is generated silence, which Wwise can handle. Previously, you actually had to have a file that contained 1 second of silence. It was very stupid. And also took up memory space and other things, which wasn't very efficient. So, right now, if we play this container here, you can see down here in your current window under current selection, you can see we are playing the switch container where it's called this, and whenever we press play, it plays what the current ground material switch is set to, which is set over here for testing purposes. If we set it to grass, nothing comes out of it. That's basically because it's switching between these two. All right, and that's how that works. So let's go up here and set our event and say that left foot run is just going to play our switch container instead. And left foot sprint is also, and so are the right feet. Here we go. We save, press F7, and build your sound bank. And that's basically it. Now, when our character triggers these events, because he still does from the footsteps that we added to his animations, it will trigger this switch container, and it should play dirt whenever he's running around. We can try it out over here in Unity. Yep, no point in testing it further. It just works. Now, let's start by creating that little tool we talked about. So we're going to be creating an empty game object. We're going to place it in 0, 0, 0 to begin with. Let's call this the WW for Wwise Material Collider. Okay, The reason why I put it to 000 is because we're going to make this into a prefab and we're going to move this around later and re-import it. But Material Collider, let's drag and drop it down here to Audio Tools so that we create the prefab. Okay, so we have a prefab here, which means that now we can add stuff to it and just click Apply. Okay, so we're going to be creating a script, and let's call this the WW Material Switch. So now we have a material switch. And we also need to have a capsule collider, which is trigger. And the point in having a capsule collider, actually if we press F, you will be able to see it. This is a capsule collider. If you change the sizes of these, of X, it gets wider as you can see, and Y, then it gets taller, and Z, it just gets wider than that. But we're just going to leave these two here, and we're only going to need this one here to be 1, because we're only going to be using the scale of this, so that we can change the area that it affects, like this. It'll look like it's popping out of the ground around this green circle here, and that's what we want to control. Okay, anyway, so our script, if we want to use it somewhere else, it should be prepared to have a required component type of capsule collider. There we go. This means that you cannot load this script without it adding a capsule collider as well. And if we try to remove this collider now, it will tell us that we cannot because the script WW Material Switch depends on it. Okay, good. Okay, in our script, let's go in here again. So what we want to do is whenever we enter the collider and exit the collider, actually we don't need these because we don't need anything to run per frame, and we don't need anything to run on startup. So remember how that worked? Void on trigger enter, and we need a void on trigger exit. Good. And in here, we simply need to say aksoundengine.setSwitch. And then what you need to tell it is the name of the group, and we called ours for ground material, comma, and then the switch name, and then where you want it to go. These are all in apostrophes. Now, why is it that we create our strings? That is simply because we want to be able to control this inside the inspector instead of controlling it inside the script all the time. So we want to be able to create this script and in Unity have things appear over here whenever we select our instance of this, so that we only have to fix things over here and not inside the code, because we prefer to stay in Unity. We are not programmers, we are sound designers. The same thing goes when you're communicating with a programmer. Explain to them that you want to be able to control things over here. You don't want things hard-coded. Okay, so what we need a public string, because we want to be able to control which switch group we are always using. And we'll call it, funny enough, switch group. And it should be equal to ground material. Remember, that was what we called our switch in Wwise. Okay, and we need a public string switch, which is equal to grass, because that's the one that we're going to be using in this example when you're inside the collider. We also need a public string, which we will call exit switch, which is the switch it will set it back to whenever you exit the collider. The reason why we write these like this is because they are case sensitive, so it's really important that you get this right. We also need to have a public game object, and this is the game object that we want this switch to have an effect on. And we'll just call this for character. Good. Now when I save inside Unity, when it's done compiling, we should be able to see all these things up here in our material switch. Poof! Da-da! Da-da-da-da! Okay, ground material, grass, and dirt. And we want to drag and drop our third-person controller over to our character, because that is where our footsteps are emitted from. Remember, if you are having your footsteps emitted from somewhere else, you want to control that object here and not the third-person controller. So have that in mind if you're controlling this somehow, or if you experiment with this. That could be one of the problems and bugs that you bump into where you are not sure where the problem occurs. Now, we need to do stuff in here. So let's go back into our script. So what was it down here? It's AK sound engine whenever we enter this collider. We want it to set the switch. And you can always hover the mouse like this and it'll tell you what it is. AK sound engine dot set switch. And then of course a lot of information that we as non-programmers might not necessarily understand, but we can try and decipher it. It wants an input about which switch group it wants. It wants an input about which switch state and then where. All these separated by commas. So we want to go to switch group, comma, and we want it to change to switch. It's really important that you type this case sensitive because if you don't, there's another call called switch with a small s. So we have that in mind. Comma, character. Like this, semicolon. So now, actually, when we enter this collider, the switch should be changed to grass whenever we go inside. AK Sound Engine, let's copy paste this down here and say that whenever we leave, we want it to become the exit switch instead. And that's very easy. Now, for good measure, we should, of course, have a public bool debug enabled. And why is it that we add that? That is simply because we want to be able to control these things down here and be able to read, are we getting something like this? So we want if debug enabled. Then, in our curly brackets here, we write what should happen. Debug.log, semicolon. We can write switch like this, space, plus, apostrophe, space, switch set. Now, let's look at what this does. This writes in the debug log, in the console that we have before, it writes switch, which means the name of this. The name of this switch, which is in this case, it is grass, plus switch set in writing. That means that when we enter this collider, we should see a message that says grass switch set, so that it works like that. So when we go down here, we of course tell it to write exit switch. So now it should say that we entered and we exited with the switch and the exit switch. But remember one of the problems that we also had before, and that is that if it's something else that enters this collider, we don't want it to trigger it. So we also want if other, which is the object here, which is the object that is colliding with this collider. If other.tag is not equal to player, which is the tag that our player has, our third-person controller, then return. This simply means that once something enters this collider, if it's not the player, then just stop the code here and return nothing, you know? And the same thing goes down here. So what happens now? We have our switch group entered, we have a switch here, we have an exit switch here, and we have decided where the trigger should be set, and we can enable or de-enable our debug. So if we save and go into Unity, we should be able to see our debug log appear over here in Unity. Ta-da! It's a little slow in compiling, but that's all right. Anyway, we hit apply. So now this is our prefab, which is down here in our audio tools, which means that if we drag and drop this in, it will have all these settings automatically. So we'll delete this one. Select our character, press F, which takes you to where he is. Now we're going to put our collider here where there is some grass. So you can take your collider, drag and drop it here. Poof. And it appears out of nowhere. You see it's really, really small. It's only 1 meter in radius around this center circle here. So we are going to press R for radius and increase it. Let's just say we want it to be this area here. Okay. So if we hit save, when we press play in a minute and run into this collider, it should, over in Wwise, trigger the usual events that we have over here, which triggers our switch container, which checks which switch is valid, if it's dirt or grass. If it's dirt, it plays. If it's grass, plays nothing. But have in mind, it's not nothing, it's this silence here. So we can just replace this with random files of grass. We'll do that just at the end of the video so you can see how that works. Now, let's go back into the view where we can see both and say that we want to remote connect, as you can see up here in Wwise, and we can press F6 so that we can see our profile is already capturing. In this way, you should be able to see up here that the switch was set and the switch was changed whenever we enter and exit the collider. You see, it already sets the ground material to dirt right off the bat because it already knows that these should be set. So let's press play here and run around. You can see the collider over here because we have the collider selected. Now, if we run into this collider here, we should see in the console nothing happens. But, ooh, suddenly no footsteps are playing because grass is active. You can tell over here if we stop following the capture, click filter and say that select none and we only want to see the switches. You can see that it went from something to dirt, or it was set to grass when we entered the collider. Now if we start connecting again here and start tracking, start capture, you will see that when we leave this collider, it'll switch back to dirt and it'll switch back to grass whenever we enter the collider again. Now check this out. Now it's dirt. Now it's grass. Now it's dirt. Now it's grass. Ta-da! That's how that works. Now I'm going to find some footstep samples of grass, put it in so that you can see that it really works. So the last thing that we're going to do here, just for fun's sake, to prove that it works, is that we are going over here in Wwise, and we are going to take these new grass footsteps that I made. They're just very brief. We're going to drag and drop them into our grass container, import them, just like this, and we delete the silence, of course. They're very subtle, but let's lower this one by 12 dBs as it was before. And grass, like this, they're very subtle, but you'll know the difference. So we save, press F7, right click, build all banks on all platforms, and we go back into Unity. Like this. So now when we are playing, the game should recognize that we have these files in our sound bank, and when we run around and into this collider, it should play our grass footsteps. Want to see if it works? Let's try it out. Ooh, the excitement as we're getting closer. Ooh, 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 whoa, 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 whoa. It works! Ta-da! Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to, or head over to patreon.com/Cujo Sound if you want to sign up and know more and support this channel. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching Cujo Sound. If you want to know more about game audio, Unity, and Wwise integrations, please like this video if you enjoyed it and hit subscribe if you want to know more. Or head over to patreon.com/Cujo Sound, where you for as little as $1 a month can help me sustain this channel and the time I take off to create all this material. I would really appreciate it. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Cujo Sound and Bjørn Jacobsen signing out.